Good evening. Call to order this workshop of the Auburn City Council for September 18th, 2017. First item on our workshop tonight is an update on our sports tourism assessment work. So I want to welcome Jason and a guest here, and I'll turn the floor over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to John Schmieder from the Huddle Up Group, sitting to my right, and Gary Alexander, sitting just behind us to our left, also from the Huddle Up Group. John and Gary have prepared a brief slideshow to discuss what it is that they're doing here in Auburn for the city of Auburn, and I'll hand that over to John now for him to take that away.
I'll launch that. Thanks, Jason. Mayor and Council, thanks for having us today. Just rolled into town this morning, and we're just getting started. And I want to preface this very brief presentation with the fact that we are in the preliminary stages. We don't have any big aha moments and findings for you at this point in time, but we will be coming back in a few months when schedule permits and we're done with our research to make our formal recommendations to council and to the city on how to proceed in the sports tourism market. So go to the next slide. We always show this graph. This is a graph of an organization that both Gary and I have been fortunate enough to be chairman of. It's a 25-year-old organization called the National Association of Sports Commissions. Sports commissions is a bit of a misnomer. A majority of that membership, and you see the growth of that membership approaching 800 members, which has doubled in the last 10 years. It also doubled the 10 years before that. A majority of those members in that growth are small and mid markets just like you, and they're mostly convention and tourism bureaus or city entities. And the sports tourism entity can be in a convention bureau, it can be a sports commission, it can be in a chamber, it can be in a city structure, it can be in a parks and rec department. There are many different formats, but we always like to show this growth because this is your competition, and the majority of your competition are small and mid markets. They're not the Dome and Olympic cities. They're not Atlanta and LA and Dallas, Phoenix where I live. Those folks have been playing this game for a very long period of time. The growth in our industry is the small markets trying to capture a bigger chunk of that youth team travel sports tourism pie, which is over $10 billion, which is research that came from our association. And the $10 billion, we're not talking about, again, those larger mega events like Olympic Games, which just got awarded LA. We're talking about the 12 and under soccer tournament, the 10 and under lacrosse event, field hockey, obviously, and ice hockey are big up here. Those types of events, what we're talking about. That's the pie we're trying to carve into. Go ahead. So this is the process we're in. Again, we're in a process. We did a really fast start. We've been talking for a couple months with Jason and his team about a project of this nature. We've done about 50 of these in the 5 years we've been in this space. Before that, Gary and I ran sports commissions ourselves for 30 years, so we've been in Jason's shoes. We understand what you're trying to do here. But of the 50, most of them are small and mid markets. Again, just like you, 25,000 and less. So we feel very comfortable in this project. We're here to tell you kind of what the process is. We've already done phone interviews. Many of you have been interviewed. Gary has talked to you on the phone, or I have as well. We're doing in-person venue tours starting tomorrow morning, all day tomorrow, and then Wednesday morning we're making a similar presentation to the external stakeholders, the hoteliers and the tourism groups. That'll be a lot more in depth than today because we have limited time. And then we'll go home in October and start writing and doing market comparisons of who do you want to be when you grow up type of thing, and come back to you and take the good pieces from those markets and bring them to you and recommend how we get there from here. So there's our schedule. The bold is where we are today. Again, we're really in the beginning stages of this. We did 28 phone interviews leading up to our venue tours tomorrow. So this, again, is kind of what our focus is. It's really venue focused primarily, and also structure focused. We are big on human infrastructure, not just financial. We're big believers. You can have the greatest tourism budget and format in the world if you don't have the right people behind it. It's probably not going to work. In your case, you don't have anybody who's dedicated to tourism, let alone dedicated to sports tourism. You've got Jason, who obviously has to run an arena as well in his full-time job, and your sports group are all largely volunteers that have their own day jobs. So that's something we're going to tackle as we get there. We don't have solutions for you today, but that's something we're going to get at. We also, over the years, have been in communication with Sheila at the Sports Commission, the Maine Sports Commission. Sheila has her own funding and structure issues that we're knowledgeable about. We've talked to her, and we're going to see her again on this trip. And try and figure out how the state may play into some of this down the road. And hopefully we can enhance the environment with the state support as well. So usually, these are our kind of our initial findings from the 28 phone interviews we've done, and talking to Jason and his sports group, and to Sheila as well. Usually we have 3 of these. I'm a son of an old coach and a coach myself. We try and boil things down, make them easy. We want to give you an easy playbook. We couldn't boil it down to 3, so you guys get 5. You're special today, you get 5. You do have a groundswell of support, including council and the Mayor Labonte, to expand sports tourism in the city. So that's very good. A lot of times we get called in and we're more mediating than we are trying to grow and develop. This is a much more positive conversation that we're having on the front end, which is great. You have some historically significant events, the Dempsey Challenge, some of the hockey tournaments, some of your outdoor events that have been going on are good. So how do we build upon that? How do we double down on those successes and build on those? Facilities, you have, I think you probably already know this, is probably one of the reasons why we're here. You have some positives and some negatives. The arena that Jason manages is largely considered a very positive thing, but the other indoor facilities either aren't available because the schools that own them are using them, or they're not really up to speed, and we're going to see those tomorrow. I'll get to know those a lot better. And the outdoor spaces, other than the rivers and the natural resources, it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of outdoor resource to drive overnight stays and sports tourism. So we'll see those again tomorrow. I mentioned earlier your staff, beyond Jason and his role, his double duty with the arena and sports tourism director, if you will. There isn't anybody else that wakes up every day and lives and breathes tourism, let alone lives and breathes sports tourism. So we've got to try and tackle that structurally. And we do think there's some opportunities here. We're not sure what they are yet, but the positive nature of the interview so far has been very good. And we think that we're going to find some things that we can really help pull from other markets that we've worked with and help build on the amount of overnight stays you have today. So with that, we'd love to field any questions council has at this time.
Thank you, John and Gary, for being here. I appreciated the chance to be interviewed, and as I'm sure counselors did, they were able to make the time. And Jason, for what he does, I think I had shared with Gary, one of the things that I'm concerned about long-term about sports tourism is just the staff capacity needed, and that and directly not as a slight at Jason, but his plate to manage that facility and build the kind of events that he's working on there. He has already a full plate, so the extent to which we can bring additional support will be important. I know that there are some skeptics, as there are on any initiative, and one of the things I'd like to hear you maybe talk a little bit about is how you look to approach the competitive advantages or the competitive environment that we operate in if we're looking to build or attract events here. How do you approach that for a city Auburn size or for a region like Lewiston Auburn?
It's a good question, and I'll tell you this: we don't. Our mentality is not to immediately let's go build something, let's go build. Our mentality is to do that later. We want to tackle what resources and what assets we have today that we can improve upon and maximize those, and then we'll go down that path if we think there really is opportunity for a new facility. I know the schools and the YMCA have things on the drawing board. We want to talk to them and figure out what those are. And is there a dovetail of what we're working on here on the tourism side and what they're trying to do? We'd rather create collaborative relationships there and not put the whole brunt of something like that on the city. So we're very conservative in that nature, just by the way Gary and I are. So we're going to look for every way, shape, and form to take what we currently have and make it better. And if there is an opportunity to, say, collaboratively partner on the design of these other facilities that may come out of the ground or support what they're doing, if it supports tourism, then we'll try and dovetail those in and pull them together in our recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Welcome.
Thank you.
I had a couple of points, and maybe this is more for staff than it is for you. I've never been a big fan of studies because too many times studies end up being looked at and then tossed aside because we can't possibly do what the study's asking us to do, or we don't want to do what the study's asking us to do. So I'm really concerned about that. But one thought that I did have is if we focus on our ice arena as being a priority over what you guys are offering, and we can save or make more business there, we can pay for the study by using best practices there that we may not be doing right now, which is very important to me. The result is very important. So as we go forward, I have not seen a goal or a goal statement from the staff, what they're trying to accomplish here. Is it just, let's figure out what we're doing and then we'll decide what the goals are later? That's the other thing that bothers me. But one goal that's very important to me, we already have an ice arena that's very, very good. It's state-of-the-art, but it needs some help only because it's costing us a fortune every year to have it. And if we can get over that hump with your help, then it's well worth everything we're spending. So I guess I'm looking for results, and how we achieve those results is going to be the most important thing to me, because if this is yet another study that gets done and then we never see any results from it or payback, really is what I'm looking for too. So I appreciate you guys being here, but I have great expectations to have you help us make and save money over the long run that will pay for any study that might be going on.
Let me respond to your question in terms of goals. As you know, we had a workshop just recently on our work plan for this coming fiscal year, and also looking beyond that. And one of the, I think, important elements of that work plan is sports tourism, which is part of the work plan. We would like to build on the sports opportunities that we have here now, what's going on with the arena, as well as what's happening with the Ingersoll Turf Facility, what's happening with recreation, what's happening with Lost Valley, the golf courses, the opportunity to be able to take advantage of the riverfront and the activities that are already taking place with events like the Bloom Festival and other similar events. I think the goal is to promote what we're doing in a more highly effective manner, and to develop events that make us a destination for sports tourism. I'm looking forward to the market assessment that Huddle Up Group's going to do, and the strategic plan that they're going to help us put together. Hopefully that helps answer your questions.
Any other counselors with anything?
I guess I'd just like to ask that you're reaching out to everybody, I hope, in our community, because we've got a big team of soccer players that, meaning hundreds of kids that play in that program. So I'm hoping we're not going to leave out any groups that may not be connected directly with the Recreation Department, but they're out there, and even to Little League and stuff, you know, working with them and bringing them together with us may be a big step in the right direction.
Our stakeholder list that we started with of those interviews has user groups, and because we, in this situation, in most smaller and mid-tier markets, we're definitely going to lean on them to be able to either create or attract or help operate those types of events. Even if you're awarded a U.S. youth soccer regional of some sort, you're going to need that local club to not only participate, but also to help support the event from a volunteer standpoint. So we definitely have them on our list, and Jason helped us map out those stakeholders that we interviewed.
In terms of schedule, I know you have your couple days of meetings, directly connecting with folks and seeing facilities. October, you're going to spend time on market work, and maybe we can go back to the timeline. I saw recommendations in November. Is that something that you would be traveling back? We would sit as a group again, you deliver recommendations, and hopefully in the lead up to that, staff, besides your report recommendations, staff would have some details about how those recommendations are either integrated into the work plan or made part of forward thinking going forward. I think the timing is good, I think, for this council, which initiated that, to be able to take some action to see steps be taken. But I just wanted to see where staff were in terms of thinking about the timeline and when these pieces would come back. In any public process you envision.
We'll take that guidance from Jason as our contact. Whatever you all need for the other things you have going on, we'll try and play right into that. And our deliverable is a playbook. It's a SWOT analysis of what's going on in the market, and with recommendations with benchmarks. So I appreciate the councilman's desire for benchmarks. So, and we'll again pull best practices from like markets.
Anything else, Peter or Jason?
Jason, anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, so on Wednesday morning from 8 a.m. to 9:45, we will be holding that external stakeholders and community meeting in the community room located just across from the council chambers. That way the public can actually meet with John and Gary and essentially get this information and some additional information added to it. We ask that all that are able, please come and attend that meeting.
I've already heard some concern that the public meeting is during business hours, and I certainly can appreciate scheduling is difficult, and a big part of this first round is engaging with stakeholders that have some skin in the game. They're either managing assets or managing programming. But if there's some way where we might structure a couple-week comment period where we could set up an email address, or you can funnel it through Recreation or through you, Jason, where we can say, anyone who has comments, thoughts, or opinions, to be able to submit them and have staff at least share that. So there's some mechanism where the public who can't make a meeting can still feel like we're trying to create a channel. I would certainly appreciate that.
We'll definitely get right on that and get that set up.
Councilor Frost, you had something?
Nope, I think you covered it there. Thank you.
I'd like to see that in more than just one department, though, because a lot of people use, you know, the recreation versus the arena versus the Ingersoll, so it should be a contact way with all of these departments.
I guess I have one more question, John. I believe in what you're doing and the concept. I think it makes a lot of sense for this community. Can you talk more specifically about similar communities that you've gone into and some of the outcomes so that people who are here in the audience and people that are viewing this meeting have a better understanding of what we're trying to accomplish here and what it could mean to the community?
Sure. So excellent question. So two of the most recent ones that are even like markets are actually even smaller markets. One is London, Kentucky. I didn't even know there was a London in Kentucky until we started that project. They're a town of about 10,000 people, and you know the outcomes there where they wanted us to be quite honest, they wanted us to rubber stamp a new facility, an indoor facility. Certain members of the community did, and we went in and we said, you're not even maximizing the current ones that you have. And if we did build a new one, it wouldn't really positively affect tourism. It was our recommendation to not build it at all. We thought it would just be a positive thing for the community user groups, which is great. And we don't want to discount the community user groups like the soccer clubs. We want to make sure that anything that we would suggest, any enhancement or even a new build in any market, whether it's here or anywhere else, also takes into account the local users, not just the tourism use. But in that situation, we made specific recommendations for enhancements of their current facilities, and then we actually put in the measurement point, the costs of those and the measurement points of how many more tournaments they would be able to run. Specifically, they're very strong in Little League there, and they're on a major highway corridor, similar to like you all with 95. And so we really tied all those things together and talked to the Little League groups around the area and convinced them to go away from this new indoor idea and into other more affordable enhancements that would actually positively enact tourism. So that's the most recent one. A very similar story in a town in Florida that we worked on. It's really a highway town as well, small community, you know, 1,500 rooms in the whole community, 10,000 people. They've turned it into a baseball, softball hub by building really solid facilities. And in their case, they didn't have the staff and the human capital to continue to build on those, to go out and bid on events and to go out and market the community. The events were happening in a vacuum. They were happening based on whoever that year's chairman of the Little League or chairman of the Ponies or chairman of the Softball Association was. And so year to year, it was up and down rather than having a sports person who lives and breathes that every day. And so now they've made that change. They're actually in the hiring process right now to fill that position. So their convention bureau there, which is only 3 people, one of them is completely dedicated to sports. And that's how many room nights are driving. The ROI on that makes sense, and to make it steady by having that person in place.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your time.
Thank you all.
Next item is a discussion on the staying home rental assistance program.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council and Mr. Manager. Thank you for this opportunity to present the work that we have done in developing the stay-at-home rental assistance program. So in your packet, I have provided for you a synopsis that has also 2 flowcharts and the draft program guidelines. This program is a city council initiative that had been funded with $75,000 of home funds. Council had directed staff to present the guidelines for the program prior to implementation so that you had the opportunity to review and to provide input. The goal of the program is aligned with our 5-year consolidated plan goal of preventing homelessness in Auburn. This will be a tenant-based rental subsidy program targeted to families who are homeless, meaning they may be living in motels or in a tent, or they may be in danger of becoming homeless through no fault of their own. The program will provide a basic need so that parents have a better opportunity to improve their situation while their children continue to receive a good quality education. So we've estimated that the annual subsidy per family will average about $8,850. And with this level of funding, we estimate we can help about 8 families. So to be eligible, a family must meet the established criteria for being homeless or near homeless by school department personnel. They will refer them to the Auburn Housing Authority, and they in turn will determine the level of assistance that they qualify for, and it'll be based on their current financial situation. Household income can be no more than 60% of the median income, and that's a HUD regulation. And the family themselves will pay no more than 30% of that income towards household expenses. Some families who have no income may qualify for full subsidy. And assistance can come in the form of a security deposit, monthly rent, and then utility payments as well. So in your packet, you see that there are 2 charts that show the steps involved in helping families in need. So it starts with the school department. I'll bring this up. So here you see the Auburn School Department will identify a family that's in need, and then they'll make a referral. Next, the Auburn Housing Authority will determine the eligibility of the family and the level of assistance that they qualify for. And they're also going to go out and inspect the units, so to make sure that they meet housing quality standards. The Stay Home Committee will meet, and they'll review the participants' file and make a determination if they should be approved or denied for assistance. The family will have to locate a rental unit. We'll be able to provide them with some assistance there, but they will have to go out and find the unit. The landlord will provide a lease that has to be approved by us because it does have to have language that protects tenants' rights. And then we will ask the family to participate in a self-sufficiency program. The landlord, sorry about this, the landlord would use that acceptable lease, and then he'll also correspond with the city to make sure that the tenant's behaviors are acceptable and proper. And then the Community Development Department, we will issue the assistance payments, and they'll go directly to the landlord or to the utility companies. And I will also report accomplishments to the city manager's office, the Citizens Advisory Committee, the city council, and HUD as well. And everybody that is on the committee will review the progress that we're making with families and the effectiveness of the program. I've talked with Christine Huffnagel from Community Concepts, and she operates the Bridges Out of Poverty program, and we will tap into her for those self-sufficiency programs for families to be referred to. The advantages we see is that children can stay in the same school throughout the year and improve overall learning during the day, and then have a stable environment in the evening and on weekends. The families will be in a safe and decent home, and the parents will have the opportunity to work towards self-sufficiency without obstacles and challenges that homelessness bring. The disadvantages is that we don't know how many families would qualify for this program, and we don't know if we have enough money to assist all of them. And the other disadvantage may be that these families could become dependent on these subsidies. Michelle McClellan, the Assistant Superintendent of Schools, could not be here this evening, but she wanted to send the message that she feels this program will have a very positive impact on schools and families, and she's very grateful that it will be available. So she, along with Richard Whiting and Rick Porter, who's here this evening, and then Holly Olivier also is here this evening, we all worked together to develop these guidelines, and they all offered valuable input into the development of this program. So we're looking for council's blessing to move forward, but first we wanted to ensure that we had captured your vision And with that, the guidelines will be finalized and approved by the city manager.
I have a few questions. The concept for this program, now Councilor Pross was a big instigator of it, so I'm sure he'll have questions or comments as well, came out of our neighborhood meetings at our community elementary schools. And one of the concerns, in particular at Washburn, was the rate of turnover of students that were not starting or ending the year in the same school. So first question, and I don't see this here, is how is this targeting students who may have to leave their particular school? How is this keeping them in their current apartment?
That'll be determined. Michelle is going to be presenting this information, the same information, to the school administrators tomorrow, and they are going to brainstorm. It would be the principals and the guidance counselors, and they are going to come up with the way to identify the families and make sure that they're staying in the units so that they stay in that same school district.
And my other, I guess it's more of a comment to the council about, I guess, one shortcoming I see here. We have a very large school district. If the goal is to try to measure impact in a particular school, I would encourage us to think about piloting a program where we would target a particular school neighborhood, where we would be looking to, in this case, if they're estimating we can only help 8 families a year, is the goal here, say, with the Washburn neighborhood, where the federal government's even investing and the state's investing even more because of the challenges in that school with poverty and the like, do we try to target resources for a multi-year period to see if we can help move the needle with one of our most challenged schools, or are we just keeping, do we keep it wide open, and then if so, how do we actually measure the impact? Because given the number of homeless students that we already know we have in the district, this money is not going to go very far district-wide. So do we target it and then maybe try to find funders that want to help us grow the program with results, or otherwise? So, Councilor Burns.
I guess to that point, I would ask the city staff assembled here whether or not we have, I guess this may be a question for the school department, but do we have any mechanism right now for measuring how many students are homeless or near homeless within the school system and what schools they may be currently in? So I think if we had that information, it'd be easier to say, oh, well, yeah, we should, you know, maybe some specific targeting might be in order, but my gut instinct is to let this program run and see if, the supply and demand are aligned, and if there is significantly larger demand, I think that's when, we as a council, the next time the CDBG budget comes up, we look to see, if this program is actually helping a significant amount of people or could help more people, maybe we need to expand it. But I wouldn't want to, I guess I wouldn't want to make a determination on how we're targeting this unless we had clear information on the outset of why we should be targeting a specific place.
Mr. Mayor? I was sat in on some of the meetings that happened, I want to say a year ago, with regard to this program, meetings that were held with administrators, principals and assistant principals of the many schools that we have in our district. And I was told by the school department that the principals and the assistant principals really do have a good pulse on what's happening with their students. And if a family becomes homeless, it's pretty much guaranteed that the school understands what's going on, whether it comes from a teacher or from an aide, or directly from a parent to a principal, that they feel like they have a pretty good idea of what's going on with some of these families. So I feel like the principals and the schools really are in a good position to identify those that are most in need, regardless of whether it's one school or another within our elementary school system. But I know that came up.
I think one of the other problems is targeting the availability of housing and where are they going to get the housing, because there's so many restrictions because of asbestos and lead paint and all of the above. So I think that also is a tough one to figure out. And what community has more than another to allow the kids to be able to move in or out?
I guess to that point, just to kind of jump off that. I didn't see in my reading of this, I know that our initial, I mean, lifting people out of homelessness, especially when they have school-age children within the city, I think is a worthy goal to tackle in and of itself. But if our goal here is to keep children within the district that they are in currently, creating some sort of system of priority where we're looking at housing within that district first, and you know, prioritizing within kind of the framework of our selection, just kind of baking that into the system so that that's our first priority. But I think if we have a situation where you know, where a family is homeless or near homeless, it's better to not be homeless than to be homeless, regardless of ultimately where that student's being educated. So I mean, but I would like to see us make as much of an effort as possible to exhaust all the opportunities that we have within the district.
Yes, Mr. Manager, in the absence of the mayor, I really like this program, and I'm very much on the same page that Councilor Burns is on. I think one of the things we heard in those community meetings is that there are a lot of children that are bouncing back and forth from school to school. And what we designed this program to try to keep them in their class for the year, and that would mean that we want to keep them in the same school district. I think that's a big item for this council. I do have a question looking at this program chart, and what I don't see, and perhaps you can illustrate it for me, is case management. How do we follow these children? Does the school have a case management program going so they follow what's going on with the student and the family circumstances and kind of, you know, watch what's going on? I just don't want to get them into the program and then just lose them. And there was a comment made on the information sheet that we don't want families becoming unnecessarily dependent on the program. Well, it's easy, you know, free rent, and, you know, we get it made. I think we want to help people. It's a hand up, and we want to help people get out of their dire circumstances. So is there a case management effort built into this program, or?
Well, I think the guidance counselors at the school would be the case managers for the students, and Michelle and I and the group did talk about this, and if a student is not attending school regularly, that would become an issue. So we would be looking for students who are attending class regularly and making an effort, and they're not disruptive in school, and that information is confidential to it's the school departments,
right,
and they can't really share that, but that would be something that we need to work further with Michelle and the school department on how to identify those.
Because the goal here is to have a plan. The goal is to keep the student in their classroom for at least the duration of the year, but there should be a plan to move the whole family unit along. And I think that takes a little bit of inspection, so to speak, and communication, so on and so forth. So
we want to meet with the families on a regular, 3 months and then at 12 months to recertify them if we need to, and if there's additional funding next year for this program. But we're only allowed to assist them for 24 months. So by then, we are hopeful that we will have helped them transition so that they can afford their own rental.
I guess I like the small program because we can then manage it, but it needs to be an effective program to the extent that it can be.
Councilor Young.
Way I understand homeless, and I don't know if I totally understand it, but there are perhaps competing programs. Something was mentioned, people staying in hotels, and maybe if a person's homeless, maybe they're not staying with their parents, maybe they're staying with friends or basically they're homeless because they don't have a home, they may be sleeping on somebody's couch. Is that pretty much my understanding? A child would be considered homeless?
Yes, if they don't have a permanent address, if they're living in their car, in a motel, I mean, when they're couch surfing, that's going to be harder to determine, but we're looking, Michelle is mostly looking at the families that are living in a motel. There may be sex offenders living in the motel that these families are at, and so that would be the first priority, is to move those families from there into their own unit.
So how they end up at a hotel, they may be there funded from some other program?
It could be, and if they are being assisted from another program, they wouldn't be eligible for our program.
Okay. The other thing you had said that one concern is that you don't know what the demand for this is because it's something new and people would fill in a certain type of category. We may be even encouraging more people to become homeless. I don't if I understand this correctly. And it sounds to me as to be a sort of a Band-Aid approach at best, and it doesn't really work on the problem of that homeless in the first place. But even saying that, there's an immediate need. But I would also like to make sure that eradicate the homeless problem in the first place would be the place to start.
That's why we want to recommend them to do the self-sufficiency programs through Bridges Out of Poverty. There's also an organization, Community Partnerships for Protecting Children. This is a Maine organization, but they have a presence here in Auburn, and they're helping families stay together so that children are not being removed from the home or from their living situation because of the fact that they don't have a home. So they want to keep those families together. So that's something that Christine Huffnagle will be able to help us reach out through that organization and maybe get them, the families, the help they need.
So what you need from us is a release of funds through a particular type of program?
Your blessing that you would like us to move forward, and I've jotted down the comments that you have made. I have in the program guidelines that it would be K through 8, and hearing what you're saying, you maybe want to narrow that down to a particular school or schools.
Councilor Burns and then Councilor Ross.
I just want to be very emphatic in something you said earlier, Yvette, or at least what my understanding of that was. I would not support a program that ties eligibility to the performance of the student. I think that is an impossibly large amount of pressure to place on a student that they could be rendered homeless if they don't maintain a certain attendance or GPA standard. That is a situation that we should put no child in within the structure of a city program. I think once a family has been deemed eligible because of their income requirements, I think that should be the basis of their eligibility. But I would never support a program that would place a child in that type of predicament within their household, because there are so many factors that could influence, even if a family is no longer homeless, that could influence attendance or in-class behavior. I think we are creating a very unsound system if we base our program off that requirement.
I definitely don't think that we need to focus on the one school. I think that the mayor was referencing perhaps some sort of a pilot program with Washburn in mind. I think that we roll this out, go with it. We've discussed it in the past, obviously the funding. I think we're on the right track with it. I think the devil's in the details. If it turns out that the majority of the people applying for this are from one elementary school geographic area versus another, then we can talk about maybe focusing the resources in some other way. But I think that there's a broad-based need, K through 8, to try to address some of these things, and I think that the approach is pretty much on the right track. I had a question about acceptable leases. Are we talking just about a lease addendum that the Housing Authority would use for housing choice vouchers, some of those sort of criteria, or are there separate criteria that have been established by
Rick?
your working group.
Answer that one. I mean, leases, HUD specifies that we have to have a lease that is going to protect the tenant's rights.
And I'm just assuming that means like a regular
regular-
Section 8
some-
housing choice voucher lease addendum that would be applicable to any lease.
Similar to, but we put that language in there because some landlords don't have leases at all, that it's just tenant at will, and that's what we don't want.
Well, we definitely want to make sure that those protections are in there for those tenants. And we see them in other types of subsidized housing. I just didn't know if this program was offering some sort of other model lease that it was requiring landlords to get into.
No, the lease would be the same type of lease that any landlord, a lot of landlords just have tenancy at will. And with the home program, you have to have some type of a lease that is the same type of lease that's followed through the Attorney General's office, that they can't have certain restrictions that nobody else would have. So it's just a regular, simple lease. It's not the housing choice voucher lease, it's just a regular lease. Housing choice voucher, the Section 8 program doesn't have a lease of its own. It's a HUD lease as an addendum because it's a government funded. We're just checking to make sure that the lease that the landlord has is the same type of lease that's approved by the Attorney General's office.
Well, I would say to that the Attorney General's lease is very disagreeable with many landlords. The housing choice tenancy addendum that automatically applies to any lease that's subject to a subsidy in a housing assistance payment contract, on the other hand, is typically very agreeable. So I don't know if you guys have workshopped that issue, but I would suggest that that might be a good way to go. Requiring landlords to enter into the Attorney General's lease.
We don't require even them to do that. It's just that what we are required to do under the Section 8 program is to make sure that there is nothing in there that's an illegal lease. Illegal things, that's the only thing that we do.
Okay.
I can't even tell a landlord. We take a look to make sure that what they say is correct.
So even if it's not the Attorney General's lease, as long as they're a lease that doesn't have illegal requirements in it, you're going to approve it.
We just have to make sure that there's nothing in the lease that's illegal.
Okay. I don't want to just see barriers to landlords enrolling in it. So that was a major concern of mine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions, but first an observation of what I've heard so far. It looks like this starts with the school department. They do the referral.
Correct.
So I like the idea that it's focused on that particular area because it can give us a guideline of where we're going and how it's working. I've heard 2 points of view when it comes to whether it should be one area or the entire district. But I think that we have about $75,000 available this first year, which might take care of 9 or 8 families, depending on how much their need is. That is such a narrow focus that if we put it out through the entire system, we won't know if it really has any effect because it may be 3 families here, 2 families here, 1 family here. And I think the idea of this program, what I like about it is it can be focused and we can see at the end of 1 year, has it really done what we've asked it to do? And if it is, we expand it maybe to more. But how are we going to know that if it's diluted throughout 5 or 6 schools as opposed to narrowly focusing it? It's just my observation there. But one other question I had too was, it's homelessness or near homelessness. So that means that somebody who's in an apartment, they're about to be evicted, they could come to the principal and say, hey, I'm about to be evicted, can you help me? And the school could kick this program in and maybe prevent that from happening? That's possible?
Right, and if they are being evicted, it can't be through, they couldn't have caused the eviction themselves by.
Just by non-payment would be so this program wouldn't help catch up their lease and.
No, I mean, if they're working and
Because it
they're
says
not
near
paying
homelessness, so I
rent.
Uh,
want to focus on that.
If someone lost their job, and because of their loss of their job is being evicted because they have not paid rent, are they or are they not eligible for this?
They are.
But they wouldn't be able to catch up with the past due rent. Say they've been there for 2 or 3 months, they owe 3 months' rent. This isn't going to help them with any past dues, so it really won't save them in that case, if a landlord so chooses to still go through with the eviction.
That's something we did not discuss.
Okay.
Past due rent.
Because I'm just trying to get a focus. Homeless is one thing, and then the near homeless, when I saw it in here, made me think, well, maybe it's more broad, because
If it's a non-payment eviction, the tenant has the right to cure the rental default within 7 days of the judgment. or
Correct,
eviction.
but if
So-
they're behind 3 or 4 months and they're about to be evicted and they
But if it
come for
keeps-
help, we're not gonna be able to help them because we can give them the next month's rent, but we can't help them with what's happened in the past.
But if we step in and we talk with the landlord and say,
So
you
we'll
will
try to
now be
head
getting
that
your
off,
rental
okay.
directly from the city.
And maybe they can have a payment plan on the back,
Exactly.
arrears and stuff, okay. I mean, that's the kind of thing I like to see, you know, everything covered. The other question I had is, it talked about this participation in a self-sufficiency program. It looks like that's not mandatory, that's optional. Is it optional or mandatory?
It's going to be strongly recommended. We don't have that program identified yet. Speaking with Christine Huffnagel, the Bridges Out of Poverty program is not operating right now. So she has offered a couple of other solutions. Community Concepts offers a one-on-one family financial counseling service, and also the Community Partnerships for Protecting Children is where she's looking to point these families for additional assistance. But we're not requiring it right now because we don't know what that program is.
We funded Bridges Out of Poverty at the startup, correct?
Yes, they did not receive funding this year.
Okay, then my last point was going to be the administration, the follow-up, because it looks like the school finds the referral, but then it looks to me like we're going to be responsible for the follow-up and gauging and checking and making sure things are on track. I don't know, we're not asking the principal to follow up with these families and see that they're doing what they're supposed to do. That's going to be our job, right? The city
Yes,
staff?
and I would like this committee to come together on a, regular basis to discuss the effectiveness of the program, and so whoever the school department personnel that will be manning that committee will be able to share.
They'll be part of it in that case. Because I really like the idea of this being, and I like to see more money, but it's actually good news to have a little less money because we can see it work. If we have 8 families or 9 families tops, but then we got to follow up and see how it's working and is having the desired effect. Because before I'd approve this to happen again next year, I'd want to see that there's some result that we can actually see and monitor, and somebody can give us the feedback. So I would request that that happens at some point after the first year of programming, that this council gets an update on specifically, not with names, but specifically what happened and how did it help? Where did it help? That kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not to try to give you mixed advice from the council, but I would just, to the point that Councilor Titus made regarding whether this ought to be a targeted or broad program, the kind of pushback I would have to the point that Councilor Titus made was that because we were only talking about funding at maximum 9 families, it seems like it should be fairly easy, regardless of where they are in the city, to evaluate the effectiveness of the program because the sample size will be so small. I don't think, we won't have a big enough sample size to see any discernible difference in average GPA or things like that. But I think if we build our deliverable, or if we build our evaluation of the efficacy of the program based on the outcomes of the families themselves, I don't see why we would want to limit ourselves to a specific area of the city when there are multiple moving parts of this program. We have to identify the student, we have to identify housing for that family. There are enough hoops to jump through that my concern would be is that if we at the outset identify a specific district that we think would be the best beneficiary for this program, and we miscalculate based on one of those variables, maybe there are a lot of kids who are near homelessness, but there's almost no housing available in that district, for example. I wouldn't want to limit the city in this first year if we can find eligible students. This will also, to a certain extent, be based on how active our school administrators are in a given district, which might vary. All of our principals are very attentive to their students, but I wouldn't want to, in this first year, narrow the scope and accidentally, keep this program from meeting the students that it needs to meet because we're limiting at the outset. And I had a follow-up question for you, Yvette. You said that people would be ineligible for this program if they were receiving other types of assistance. Could you clarify what assistance would make someone ineligible under this program?
For instance, a Section 8 voucher, if they're already receiving a rental subsidy.
So if they're receiving GA or any sort of federal benefit, that would also render them ineligible. Is that a legal requirement or is that a policy?
That's a policy that we put into place.
Okay, what's the rationale for that?
So that they're not double dipping and getting more assistance than they actually need.
So if they're at the point of homelessness and they're receiving benefits and they're still homeless, we're assuming that they could, so I'm just trying to parse out the policy goal here.
I guess it's more like if a family hears about this program through word of mouth, and they say, well, I want the city to pay my rent, so they cause themselves to be, they already have assistance, and they cause themselves to be in a situation where now they're gonna have us pay their full rent.
So-
If we can determine that,
So by that same token, does that mean that if they utilize this program, they would be unable to subsequently apply for a different form of assistance?
this is just the initial requirement to be approved for the program. Once they're in, we want them to do everything they can to find other means to help them come out of homelessness, out of poverty, so that they can be self-sufficient in the end. So I think the program goal is to have this family be housed, and they're taking care of their own needs, and we're no longer subsidizing that.
So if for example, one of the parents receives Social Security disability because of a long-term health issue, that family would be ineligible under this program as you envision it?
No, because that would be considered income, and we would calculate that income and come up with the rental assistance that would be 30% of that income.
So which programs would qualify as income and which would qualify as other benefits?
So income, as we calculate it, and the Housing Authority also has a formula for calculating income, anything you get from a job, and then Social Security benefits of income, child support is considered income. So we add up all of those things, and they must be 60% or below the median income, and then they can only pay 30% of that income themselves, and we would cover the rest.
So I guess if the standard is income, why not just include any source of income that that person is receiving, regardless of whether it's through SSI or through another program? I guess I just can't figure out why we would be parsing that out or excluding people based on if even with that benefit they fall below the income threshold in terms of what that family is actually taking in on a monthly basis. I guess I don't see where the distinction is being made.
Maybe a better example would be like the utility payments. If Holly's office is paying their utilities, we would not also pay their utilities. So that would offset the assistance they get from this program.
So it'd be specific to housing or the specific things that we'd be paying to the landlord? Okay, thank you. That was not clear at the outset.
I have a couple of quick observations and maybe a request, and maybe the council will indulge me in supporting the request. The Auburn City Council is not going to end homelessness in Auburn, and we are not going to end poverty in Auburn. We're talking about creating a gap filling 12 months of assistance for housing with none of the other wraparound services other than hoping community concepts can step up. And it was pretty profound, Yvette's reference. We started funding the Bridges Out of Poverty program, which is intended to give people sort of these wraparound services, and then we stopped funding it in CDBG. Now we're going to create a program that says, you're on hard times, you're in the cycle of poverty, here's 12 months rent, hopefully you can figure it out. We're not going to end poverty, we're not going to end homelessness, but if we're going to insert ourselves into someone's life, I think we need to make a commitment that time that we're there helping to pay some of the bills, that we're offering them all the support they need to get themselves to the other side. So I would like to see the council be supportive that Yvette and Peter can engage with community concepts and the folks that manage the Bridges Out of Poverty. Let's come up with a per family cost for those support services And if we're going to put 12 months rent on the table, let's put 12 months of support for those families on the table at the same time. If we're going to be in that family's life when they're trying to wrestle with all the things that may have them in poverty, let's be supportive of getting them on the other side and see what we learn from that. Maybe there was something else that was missing. If you want to improve the program and help to give people a steady path out of poverty or out of homelessness, not curing it citywide, but those who we choose to get engaged in particular families that have kids in our schools, let's provide the full scope of support. And if that's an extra $5,000 per family, let's commit to doing it. Let's find the money to do it.
So are you saying that we should be spot funding specific what exactly would that funding be going toward?
Well, I would defer to Community Concepts and the folks that manage Bridges Out of Poverty, that there were very specific support efforts that they built into that program, that they were, engaging with people on around everything from job skills to financial management and the like, that if we're going to start to bring revenue into someone's household budget, let's try to be supportive and provide the other services that go around that. And I would defer and ask staff to maybe come back with, all right, if we're going to be able to provide some additional support to these families, here's a dollar figure, and just commit that we're willing to provide funding for that wraparound support for those 8 families.
I believe that is about $1,800 for the Bridges Out of Poverty program for the 13-week sessions. It's about $1,800 per family.
Let's just fund that.
Yeah, right.
Let's just fund the organizations let's fund the Bridges Out of Poverty program if they're already doing it.
They didn't apply this year. I mean, it's not that we didn't fund them, they didn't apply because they did not have the counselors, the teachers to provide the program, and they struggled to find participants last year. We did provide them funding in the previous fiscal year, and they struggled with families
I'm just pretty confident that with the vet skills, with Sean Yardley and the folks at Community Concepts and Peter, that some package of additional support could be committed as part of this, that the requirement of the adult, the head of the household as part of coming into this program, this isn't about the kids getting good grades or showing up to school, it's about the head of the household is going to accept the support, and they agree to also accept our support to build some skills to climb out of poverty.
So so let me preface all of this by saying that nothing that I'm about to say, I in no way want to prevent this program from moving forward. So in the event that we are unable to come to a consensus about the points you're bringing up, I would like to see this project move forward as is. I think it's a lot better than nothing. My hope, so I think this program, this type of program would be most effective if we are trying to be comprehensive in bringing these, once, it takes a lot of effort to identify families in need at the outset. That's a very labor-intensive process. So I think if we're going through that work, aligning those individuals with the resources that are available just makes sense from a public health and poverty reduction standpoint. I'm not sure why so I guess I'm not sure if committing more funds to fund those programs on a per family basis makes sense, but I would certainly support, as part of the scope of the work that this committee is doing, or within the context of this program, being very clear that our goal is to make available or make information available to these families about the programs that they might benefit from. But I'm not sure if that's the same thing as what you're suggesting with actually committing funds to fund those. I don't think that's I can't think of a nonprofit that would be able to really budget effectively if we're giving kind of a per family voucher. That's a lot different than funding a line item for a program, and I don't think that that's an effective way to deliver those services.
That's a management function, not a policy-making function.
I mean, I'd be happy with kicking it over to city staff to see what they think, but my gut says that...
Ask the nonprofits that do this work.
Well, that's...
If they'd be willing to be a partner in it.
Well, I mean, kicking it over to staff to ask those questions, but I would be... My gut reaction to this is that it would make more sense to try to proactively align existing programs with this program rather than trying to spot fund new programs or existing programs.
Mr. Mayor, excuse me, but one of the things that this came from was council discussion a year and a half ago about transitions in the school system causing a serious problem. One of the major issues we have with schools having a low grade is the students transitioning out, sometimes 60%. So this council came up and asked for a program that would help us with that problem. And now I'm hearing council say, no, let's just make it broad basis, another general assistance program. Let's just throw it into the pool and see if it does anything. And what I'd like to see is if it's going to be focused, and our goal was to slow down the transition, help with transitioning parents to try and keep the kid in the same school, then what we're doing here is just taking $75,000 and throwing it into general assistance. And we can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we originally talked about this a year and a half ago, we were trying to solve a specific problem. And what I'm hearing now from council is, no, we don't want to do that specific problem. We want to just throw it out there and become part of the homeless program in general. And again, I have no problem with that, except that I was one of those that really agreed that we had to do something about that real serious problem of transitioning students. This program should focus on that. It starts with the school system. They got to tell us where they think it's going to benefit in that area, not just who comes in and applies, or how much money they've got, or how much assistance they're already getting. We start there. If they're a student that's in danger of transitioning to another school or leaving town because they can't afford where they are or whatever, that's where it should focus, so we can see at the end of the year that this money paid off in what we were looking for. But if we just make it general and broad-based, we're never going to know if it had any effect on what the initial goal was. And if that's true, this council shouldn't make a specific goal. They should just say, throw it out there.
I don't agree with that characterization of what's being proposed. The program starts with the identity of a family in need by the Auburn School Department and then a referral. So to me, this is very targeted to the school, to the family populations with children in schools, and it's narrow enough to say K through 8 is the grade level that you need to be in to qualify. So I think that this is reasonably targeted toward those goals. But to talk about narrowing it down to specific neighborhoods, to me, is the wrong direction to go on this. Can you imagine if there's somebody in this sort of dire situation with kids in the Walton School, and they come and apply, and you say, I'm sorry, you don't live in the right neighborhood, you're not eligible for these funds? That hardly seems fair to me. Now, if a year down the road and into this program, the first 3 months of it, all 8 of the families that we can afford to fund have already applied, then okay, then we can have something to talk about. Where do we target this, or do we expand the program? But I think for a starting perspective, I think, and if we don't have enrollees after the first 3 months, that should let everyone know sitting here that something is wrong with the program. And I would suspect that the first question would be, what is the school department doing to promote this program? How engaged are the principals? How engaged are the staff of the schools with this program? How knowledgeable are they? How come we're not getting those referrals? And I hope that that problem will be brought to the attention of the policymakers right away. But I don't suspect that'll be the
Well,
issue.
I hope it's not a promotion. I hope it's the school has identified a need that's already there. It should be pretty obvious. You know.
One more comment, and I'll turn to the manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councilor Titus. This program was designed to keep kids in the same classroom, essentially, for the balance of the school year. That's where it started. That's what we heard from the principals as being a major problem. And, you know, I don't care if we have somebody in every kid from every ward in the city in the program. But I think we need to need to remember what the initial design was. That was to keep children in school for the full year. So, and I think it's very easy to measure the effectiveness of this. November, child is referred into the program. Did he finish, or did he or she finish the year in that classroom? Yes or no? And that doesn't take a lot of work to track that. So, you know, let's not stray too far from what the initial design of this program was.
Manager?
So, obviously, this is an issue that all of you have an interest in. I'm trying to determine what the consensus is here for the staff. And listening to you, there seems to be some consensus to go forward with this program and come back with a report.
Absolutely.
With some of the questions that you've raised answered at that workshop. Does that sound reasonable?
I think everybody's in favor of having it go forward. The only disagreement really might be just whether it's focused or broad-based throughout the district. And again, I think that's up to the school to decide. I'm offering my opinion, but I think the school district has got to be the one that decides that, how they're going to bring this out, and whether or not it's going to be solicitation of, hey, come on, anybody who needs help, come forward, or is it find somebody, you notice something going on and you recommend this person. That's what I'm hoping it's going to be. Oh, I recommend this person because, and they recommend this family, and not necessarily just putting out a flyer saying home and say, hey, here's a new program, anybody interested? I think the best way is to have the school system first. They must be able to identify needs pretty quickly.
Families are coming forward when they are homeless. They used to try to hide it. They didn't want anybody to know, but now they're finding, principals and guidance counselors are finding that parents are coming to the school and saying, I need help. So that's how we would start the identification process.
Is there anyone who objects to the program that's been presented by Yvette and with the idea of coming back with a report, follow-up workshop?
My biggest concerns, again, are related to the eligibility criteria, but I would, again, I want to see this program move forward, but I would like to see more detail about ultimately what the eligibility criteria is.
And I don't have a vote, but I would like to hear something back at the next council meeting about what type of wraparound services might be recommended by some of our partners, and if there's a fiscal note tied to either buying capacity to be available or a per family to cover tuition or otherwise, I'd like to know that, and if we need to find a way to find resources or think about that for next year's budget.
I agree, this is going to help us find the next step. Hopefully this is just the beginning of solving a big problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
The next item we have on the agenda, and I'll make a note, the item D, which is related to the school subsidy, Peter will take that up in his manager's report, so we're not stretched for time here. So item C is a discussion around a potential tax increment financing district, number 22. So I'll turn the floor over to you, Eric.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. To my left is Ben Averill, our Economic Development Specialist. He's worked closely with Michael on this. Michael couldn't be here tonight, so we're covering for that. Advantage Payroll Services currently employs 144 employees. I know you've had a lot of this information in your packets since last week, but in case the public or somebody at home is interested, they've been at the current site since approximately '87. We were approached by Steve Bonine of Maine and Company, who's in the back row on the right-hand side, not that long ago, and to his left is Roland Truchon from Advantage Payroll Services. They are considering making a pretty substantial investment in their facility, just a little shy of $3 million, $2.98 million, at their facility at 126 Merrow Road. They're concerned making the substantial investment with also being hit with a substantial tax liability in the early years after that investment, and they asked the city if they would consider a TIF district at their location to prevent them from seeing that substantial increase in taxes after making the investment. One of the challenges with this proposal is they're looking to make a decision about a major investment, nearly $3 million. At this point, we don't have enough detailed information until they decide exactly what that investment entails to accurately tell you exactly what the new tax revenues will be. If you look at the memo that was included in the packet that summarized their development proposal, the table shown on the right-hand side of the screen, they're looking at floor plan revisions and improvements at about $960,000. Additional ADA restrooms at about $330,000, and HVAC replacement and efficiency improvements at about $215,000. unless those improvements change the class or quality ratings of their space, they're important to their efficiency for their business processes and modernizing their facility, but they may not change the value of the property all that much. They feel they need to make those improvements to stay here and retain those jobs here in Auburn, but there may not be a substantial increase in tax revenues based on that investment. The parking lot expansion at $175,000 will add some taxable value to the property. And the purchase of and installation of new furniture and equipment at $1.3 million will really depend on what type of equipment they purchase and what the exemption status is under the business equipment tax exemption programs for what the tax revenues would be. So staff, looking at that, wanted to bring this to the council. We do anticipate an increase in assessed value, but it may not be a substantial increase in assessed value. So there may not be that much revenue going back to the business in order for the city to assist and ensure that those jobs stay here. And hopefully their improvements make them even more competitive in their industry, and we may see future expansions that we wouldn't see if we don't assist them in this way now to make sure that they stay here and keep those jobs in the community. We do anticipate an increase in value. Somewhere between $100,000 and $1 million is likely. It's hard to say exactly, not knowing what percentage is Betty exempt and what the other improvements will do as far as changing the class of their or quality of their space in the assessment. They currently have about $2.5 million in property value and about $227,000 in personal property. They pay about $59,000 a year in property taxes and about $5,000 a year annually in personal property taxes. They're asking for 100% of the new value that's created by this development program to be returned to them in the form of a credit enhancement agreement. So it may, it should be somewhere in that range as far as actual dollars, but it may not be that many actual dollars based on the increased value that's returned to them in order to retain 144 jobs and give them the opportunity to grow here in Auburn. So staff is supportive of this credit enhancement agreement, and I think if you had specific questions about the way they operate, why this is necessary, I think we could certainly ask them to answer some of those questions.
Thank you, Eric, and we do have representatives of Advantage in the back of the room. Thank you for being here. If the council has questions or if you'd like to make any comments, actually, if there's anything specific you'd like to say, happy to open the floor now, or do you want to wait and see if there's any questions? That way the folks at home can hear you. Just introduce yourself if you could.
Mr. Mayor and Council, my name is Steve Bonine. I'm part of Hickey & Associates. We've been employed by Paychex, who's the parent company of Advantage Payroll Services, to help with this planned expansion at Auburn. They've had some choices on what to do with their dollars and expansion dollars. The one thing I wanted to make note to you is this: what's unusual about this particular project is that this is one of the few facilities the company owns. Their business model is to lease property. And that makes it a totally different decision on their part to continue to invest somewhere. And although in this particular project they're not adding jobs, they're trying to make their current environment a real favorable environment so they're an employer of choice in the community, and they're well thought of, and they're enabling future growth. So we're pretty excited about this relatively small investment of $3 million, but to the company it's significant on their part to be continuing to invest in this property that they own rather than look for other options. Roland can answer questions directly. She's been with the facility for quite a while with Advantage Payroll Services before Paychex bought them back in 2002, I believe, and has a depth of knowledge about their role in the community and what they've been able to do. I'm here to answer questions. I'm the the numbers guy. I helped them evaluate some different opportunities that they had, and being a Maine resident, I'm very supportive of them being here and continue to grow here. But my job as a consultant was to help them look through the numbers. And the city manager, staff, and Michael Chaming and Ben and Eric have been very helpful in having us do that type of an evaluation. So I'm here to answer questions.
I have a question, and either Eric or perhaps Steve, you can answer. You know, we're looking at targeting this tax increment financing district to the increased investment in personal property in particular. Maybe one or both of you highlight how personal property for businesses is taxed at the local level in other states or states that we're competing against.
The two main states we were competing against for this project, one was New York, which is not a favorable tax environment, but the other was Pennsylvania, that has some advantages as far as taxes were concerned. The advantage for New York for us was that Paychex, their major headquarters, is in Rochester. For us to move this regional service center to that facility would have been very easy to do. They have some major expansions they recently announced in New York State. Some significant tax benefits are getting there, and it made a lot of sense to actually consolidate this facility there. Local management made a strong case that they have a very strong business case here. They've got great people. They want to stay here as part of the region, and that kind of won the day. If you know a lot about site selection, it's just not all about the incentives. A good incentive won't make a bad location good. A good incentive will make a good location even better, and that's what we're looking for here to help with the tax abatements through the TIF.
Any questions from the council? Councilor Stone.
Looking through the packet here, obviously the goal is not job creation, the goal is job retention as the major objective of applying for this TIP, and as the major benefit that this city would see if we do approve the TIF. What is the total dollar amount of annual wages saved, retained? I couldn't find that in here.
Excuse me just a minute.
I don't have a quick answer for the total wages saved while they're looking for some of those details.
I'm thinking it's somewhere around $5 million.
One way to kind of put it in perspective.
But I didn't have my calculator, so I can't trust those numbers.
Per job, if there was a 600,000 increase in valuation, about $14,000 a year is still less than $100 per job per year returned to them to retain those jobs. Doesn't answer your question, but it kind of puts in perspective the per job subsidy that would be given.
I could get it once I get to a calculator.
So,
very good question. We have the numbers. We can just multiply the
They're not
numbers
here,
out
right.
and get you an estimate.
Okay.
yeah, sir, you said a second ago that this is a regional service center, and the headquarters are in Rochester, New York?
Yes.
What is the region that's served by this regional service center, the geographic region?
My generic term will be New England. I'll turn to Roland and ask her directly. Good question. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, our regional service center services all of New England.
Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Connecticut, Rhode Island, all from
All
Auburn.
6 states, yep. And we service about 26,000 clients out of this regional service center on Merrill Road.
And you're looking at either moving this to the Rochester facility to service New England, or Pennsylvania, or keep it here?
We have another regional service center in Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, so.
What region does that serve?
New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. But it could be easily consolidated.
Point, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just, I see that it's 19 jobs that may be affected. Is that what I saw in somebody mentioned? Is that the pretty much the rest of the staff, the sales and service organization part of it would stay. You're just looking for a new home base, or you may consolidate home bases?
No, sales and service, that 120 full-time employees, most of that is service. There's only about 10 salespeople.
Okay, but those jobs would stay. I mean, you're still going to service, you wouldn't move out of New England and
They
decide you're
could.
not going to do New England anymore.
They could go to another regional service center.
So we're talking a lot more jobs. You're talking about
Right.
144 in total.
Yeah, the only ones that would really stay would be the sales group, which is about 10 people.
Okay. I mean, certainly it's something to look forward to, look at. My only concern, and I'll just bring it up only because I'm just that kind of guy, is, I mean, obviously we want economic development, but when we start getting economic development and growth, we're going to pull back and decide to 100% TIF any benefit to the taxpayer. And I understand what we're trying to do here. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Council questions? So in terms of process, go ahead, Eric.
If I could just address Councillor Stone's, your estimate was very close, about 5.2, 5.3 million in annual wages.
In terms of process, tax increment finance districts require a public hearing with a notice period. Staff are recommending the public hearing be on October 2nd. Is that sufficient time for the posting for the public notice period? I thought it was 14 days.
It's close. We can verify that certainly tomorrow. It is close.
If it's 14 days, which I believe it is, then we're going to have to be in the second. We're going to have to be at the second meeting of October.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure this gives the public a chance to look at this information and weigh in.
And the October 2nd date, I believe, is a holiday, so it would actually be the October 9th, I think, meeting, or is that?
October 9th is the holiday.
The 9th is the holiday, okay.
Okay, we're all set. Thank you very much for coming up tonight.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
We've got 8 minutes, Mr. Manager. Is that sufficient time for you to highlight your one-page memo on school subsidy?
Yes, it probably is. At the workshop, the last council meeting regarding the additional school subsidy, I was asked to verify the discussion that I had with the Deputy Commissioner of Education, Susan Bowden. She has sent an email verifying the conversation that we had, and she verified that there does not need to be a change in EPS regarding the Auburn School Department. So, if the council wishes, you can move forward to credit the taxpayers.
Is that something that we're deciding as a council, Mr. Manager, or is that a decision that lies with staff, as been suggested in the past?
Staff is happy to carry that out if the council wishes us to do that.
This council already voted to do that back with the budget season. So we agreed to a budget based on the promise of 100% tax relief, and I don't think we need to vote again. I think you have the right to do that.
That's what we expect to be done.
Rare unanimity.
All right. Thank you very much.
We will be in recess. We'll start the meeting at 7. Good evening. Called to order this meeting of the Auburn City Council for September 18th, 2017. If you'd all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have the minutes from September 11. I would entertain a motion.
Motion to accept?
Second.
Motion from Councilor Burns, second from Councilor Lee. Any discussion? Those in favor, show of hands. Those opposed, 601. Councilor Walker is temporarily out of the room. We have a communication in the packet for the public, which is responses from the Charter Commission with respect to the public hearing that we hosted at Central Maine Community College. That'll be just accepted into our record. We are at the first open session of the evening. Anyone who would like to speak to the City Council about an issue related to city business that's not on the agenda is welcome to do so. Dan will take longer.
That was adorable. I don't know how to take that, but that's okay. All right, sorry about that. I hate sitting and speaking, just so people know. I'm used to standing up and doing it, so if I stutter, I apologize greatly. My name is Melissa Dunn. I'm a tenants' rights community organizer in Lewiston and Auburn. My former employer, I should say my residence, right? I live at 254 Blake Street in Lewiston. I'm here today because I received a complaint from a tenant. It's a couple. And just kind of to reiterate, last year I stood before this, not probably this council, because the dynamic looks different. It's all male, and I'm kind of surprised about that. Not that I'm hating, but I delivered testimony last year, and I gave a fair warning about the dynamic difference in Lewiston's visibly aged and neglected housing stock that was long ignored. And on that side of the river, our old mill town has faced generations of stigma and stereotypes solely based on the very location of our homes, and that has passed down the line. And it's been used as an excuse to abuse and exploit families. In Auburn, there's pockets of poor housing that are scattered throughout, so it makes organizing a little challenging. And Auburn speaks to image and takes great pride in that, but behind the walls are families that have become victims from the very same property owners that do business in my hometown. So when I spoke at the council, I delivered a testimony regarding the August 11th release of Maine People's Alliance report. It was called Time to Name Names, Lewiston's Landlords of Concern, How Joe Dunn, Ted West, and Rick Lockwood Profit Off the Poor. And it was because of much of my work doing tenant organizing in the community that report exists. One of those property owners in particular at that time held 10 alias limited liability corporations, which is a perfect strategy to avoid any accountability. And it's really hard, like if there's an emergency, to even reach somebody if there's an emergency. They wish to remain absent and ignore their responsibilities. Most common issues of one particular property owner is leaking roofs, lead paint, pest infestation, no hardwired smoke detectors, and families are repeatedly moved into apartments without repairs being made. There's no provision in place that if code has been involved in an apartment, that code's not following up, checking and make sure that apartment's taken care of, or the building, and families are just moved in one right after another, and they're not disclosed the information before they move in. And then when they speak out, it's common that they face retaliatory action by turning off the heat, turn off electricity, turning off water because they spoke out. They've also been illegally locked out of their homes and have faced eviction for speaking up. And so one of the particular property owners that does business in Auburn as well, in Lewiston, at that time owned over $4.2 million in assessed property values. Fortunately, I don't have numbers for Auburn, but recently I've been receiving a lot of contacts from tenants in the same kind of situation, and there was a couple that reached out to me. By medical professionals, they consider it mild retardation, but it's special capabilities, and the spouse has cerebral palsy. And so they are disabled and receive disability. And they made complaints because they had a leaking roof and leaking windows, and they've contacted code enforcement here at Auburn, and there has been no resolve. So they felt like what their next step was to do was to withhold the rent, and that automatically allows the landlord to evict the couple for non-payment. Now, if eviction is processed and they're served and they have to face their day in court, the tenant always will have to leave the apartment. It's just a matter of when. It's never a matter that they'll win a suit. They might win a suit as far as money, they might win a suit to be relocated, or win a suit if they've been discriminated against, but other than that, it's a guarantee that they have to move. And likely, they want to move because the situation's so bad. So I want to show you something really quick, and I don't want to take too much of your time because I know there's other folks that want to speak. But if you could please get past my very fast, it looks like kindergarten writing. I don't know if people can hear me. At the bottom in orange, I have outlined what some common things that tenants do. Like, they've called for different apartments, they've called their doctor, they've called code enforcement, they've called the city, they've called their support, whether it be case manager, they've called lawyers, they've called code again and code again. So the initial process starts with the tenant's concerns, and then they might make phone calls, 1 to 3 or more, to call the landlord to tell them they have an issue. Their first step to address it by Maine state law is writing a letter that has to be sent by certified mail, and the landlord has 5 to 7 business days to respond. Let's say they don't respond. The tenant has to write another letter by certified mail and wait 3 to 5 business days to respond. The only time that is different is if the building has pests like bed bugs, and it's 3 to 5 business days for their initial letter. Let's say they want to process to make repairs and withhold rent for those repairs. They have to go through more letters. So they write a letter telling a landlord they're going to withhold their rent. That takes about 5 to 7 business days. And then they write another letter if there's no response, saying, we are for sure going to be withholding our rent because you have not been fixing this issue. And that's the process. Eventually, there's not a chance in the world they'll ever make it to court because they don't know how to navigate the system. It costs money to go to court. But for people who are disabled, they can ask to have the fee waived to go to court. That's the process that the Maine state law tells a tenant that they have to do to get their issues fixed. And by then, they've maybe had mold in their building and they're becoming sick from it, or have called code enforcement, no response, face this retaliatory action. And this is like, it's lengthy, it's you know, it's burdensome, and it causes all these other kind of problems like depression or physical sickness or whatever the case might be. So I guess, you know, in my work in organizing, the gentleman wanted to be here tonight to share a story, but from trying to navigate a conversation with me and resources in the community, it just came physically overwhelming, and he needed to take the rest of the day off, which I don't blame him. You know, he has disabilities, and self-care is really important. But I think, you know, revealing the truth about what families have to go through in Lewiston and in Auburn is important. And what I'm hoping is, like, the property code that was to be revamped maybe is not working, because the big question is, who is going to enforce this? The gentleman was told that the code enforcement wasn't going to fine him because there was no point, because the landlord wouldn't respond to that type of action, basically, which is unfortunate. And so I'm just asking folks, you know, to ask yourself as leaders who are willing to risk standing with their community, like, be the leader that our community needs you to be. Try to get people together to address these issues. I mean, there's property owners that are renting without insurance on their buildings. There's property owners that don't have, you know, repairs done to apartments and just moving people in. And this can all be easily prevented. And I understand resources are, you know, minimal for code enforcement, but they need support so they can do a better job to make sure they're fining people, habitual offenders who are not doing their job. Thank you.
Dan Herrick, 470 Hatch Road. After that, I don't know if I even did to talk about code enforcement. Last week I brought up a situation, and I've talked to the mayor and Andy about it, and Andy said that he's working on it. I'd like to know where the status. It's a major problem, probably larger than what she was just talking about. I've never had her problems. When my tenants call me, I'm there. Does anybody care that this has been going on in this city for a good many years, and it's just snowballing into a bigger ball? It needs to stop. Has anybody from this city in code enforcement gone to these people and asked what they could do to help them, see what the real situation is, what the problem is? Are we having these building owners just bang their heads against the wall and say, oh, I just purchased this building and I can't do nothing with it? I know what that feels like. Do we continue on this path, or do we do something about it? I just like some answers, because answers need to be had. But again, I feel like it's just going to get swept under the rug like it always does, and it's going to come back, and it's going to come back, and it's going to come back, and just kept being swept under the rug. When there's an issue out there as big as we have, it should be taken care of, and these people should have been contacted by the hierarchy of this community on what can we do to help you, because we know there's been a problem, but evidently nobody thinks there was. But I'm not going to give up.
Bring it back to the council under unfinished business. We have an ordinance for second reading.
Move that we adopt ordinance 10-09112017, adopt a zoning ordinance text amendment to Article 4, District Regulations, Division 2, Agriculture and Resource Protection District, Section 6-145, Use Regulations, B, special exceptions to allow kennels as a special exception in the Agricultural and Resource Protection Zone.
I'll second that.
A motion from Councilor Lee and a second from Councilor Stone for ordinance 10-09112017. As a note, this failed on first reading. I will open the second reading for any public comment. Close the second reading. Any debate from the council? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk for a roll call, please.
Councilor Burns?
No.
Councilor Young?
No.
Councilor Pross? No. Councilor Stone?
Yes.
Councilor Titus?
No.
Councilor Lee?
Yes.
Councilor Walker?
Yes.
That fails 3-4. Under unfinished business, item 2 is an order that was tabled from the last meeting. I will ask for a motion to get it on the floor, and then I will ask Mr. Cousins to come and provide an update for the council.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we take order 81-09112017 off the table for consideration.
Second.
Are you motioning to accept the order?
Yes.
That's the second from Councilor Stone. I have a motion from Councilor Burns, second from Councilor Stone for Order 81-09, 112017, and I will turn the floor over to Mr. Cousins for an update.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I did a follow-up inspection this morning, just a little after, right around lunchtime, a little before. There were new places in the fence that were broken, that weren't broken last week, as well as repairs made to some areas of the fence. What I was told was that as they've been trying to hammer on new boards to patch holes, that boards next to them are breaking because the fence is in very poor condition. They said they were going to try to use screws, so that didn't continue to happen, but I think it just demonstrates that the fence is in pretty poor condition if it falls apart that way. They did say that they were going to continue to work on fixing it, but didn't have any more boards that were painted, so the new boards would not be painted. They're really not in compliance with the screening requirements, and they're just not willing to do anything above the bare minimum that they think they can get away with for screening the dirt. So that's the status as of today.
Any questions for Eric before we have debate?
What is the bare minimum, Eric? What is the bare minimum by the planning board's requirements for screening? Because I've seen that fence and it doesn't really seem to screen much at all, regardless of the need for repairs.
So it's 6 feet high as a minimum. They've never been, to my knowledge, through the planning board process because they've been there since I think the late 30s. The state law, as a maintenance standard, really requires a fence that's at least 6 feet high or high enough to provide complete screening from the highway that it's adjacent to. Their fence, I think, is taller than 6 feet. In order to accomplish that screening, I think it's more like 8 or 9 feet in areas. It needs to be maintained in good repair, and it needs to be to the satisfaction of the municipal officers of the community that approves the license. So we can work with them to try to get repairs made to the screening, but it's clear to me that they're not going to do a new fence that's all one color or one solid material or attractive in driving by there.
Upon your inspection, is it satisfactory?
It's not. It does not meet the standard for the state at this point.
Was there any indication given as to when they could make it satisfactory?
A week before last Monday, they had committed to having it done. Then it wasn't done as of last Monday, so it was tabled to this Monday. It wasn't done as of about noontime today, and they did tell me that they would try to fix it today, but because they didn't have paint, that it would be different. The boards would not be painted to match the rest of the fence.
Would you recommend that we deny, or would you recommend that we conditionally accept based on their repair to the standards that you're seeking by a certain date?
I'd be comfortable with either one. I think it accomplishes the same thing. The approval with the condition that they repair it by a certain date saves us a trip if they choose to comply back to the council, so I guess that would be easier to implement.
Under what time window would you give them to do it before their license is revoked?
I would think a couple of weeks is enough. I mean, this is something that we shouldn't have to ask for every year.
Councilor Burns?
Eric, ostensibly this the screening regulation is in place for a reason. Could you just lay out for us briefly what potential sources of pollution could occur if the screening is not properly maintained?
It's an appearance screening, really. It's a visual screen from the highway so that driving in from on any main road, it's a statewide standard, it's not unique to Auburn, that you don't have to look at fields of junk vehicles that are stored long-term.
Are there any other, is this issue limited to the screening, or are there other issues that have been, that would cause them to not be in compliance?
There have been other issues in past years, but we've worked closely with them, spent a lot of time getting them to arrange their yard to meet the other flood standards for the storage of fluids and mercury switches and batteries and vehicles with those. The junkyards are messy. This one's no exception, but they are mostly in compliance with their operating standards with the exception of the screening right now.
Thank you.
How does this relate, if at all, to shoreland zoning and its proximity to the Little Androscoggin River?
We've had them move vehicles containing fluids that would float out of the engines and batteries away from the river and out of the floodplain as the standard requires. They are grandfathered because of their long-term footprint there. They store vehicles much closer to the river than you could establish today, but the location has been used that way for decades. I mean, they've filled that peninsula since at least the 30s to make the whole area usable right up to the banking on the edge of the river in some cases.
Question, Eric, which corridor in Auburn have we heard the most feedback about its aesthetic challenges as it relates to business attraction to Auburn?
We've heard a lot about the Washington Street corridor. I mean, this is one of the pieces of that puzzle.
When is their deadline to have a permit in order to continue operating before they're in violation?
I believe it's September 30th, but the city clerk could probably confirm that.
Yes. September 30th is the last day on their current license.
Do I have a motion to amend the order, Councilor Lee?
Yeah, I move to amend the order to conditionally grant the license so long as the repairs are made to the satisfaction of the city by September 30th.
Second.
I would like to address that motion and follow it with a tabling motion to table this until our next meeting after September 30th and take it up then, because if they can't make the necessary corrections by then, what business do we have going forward with a conditional license? I want to see this thing repaired before we grant any sort of license. That's the only thing we have to hold over their head, and I would make a motion to table it.
Before I accept the tabling motion, I just want to clarify legally, if the license expires September 30th, the business cannot operate until the council takes further action. So we would shut that business down at midnight on September 30th.
That would be my understanding.
Or they would probably continue to operate unless we filed an 80K lawsuit.
They would operate in violation of the law with penalties that we could hold over their head until they come into compliance and grant them with a permit.
Right. Knowing those implications, there's a motion by, we have a motion and a second for the amendment, which is on the table. I now have a tabling motion. Do I have a second for the tabling motion? Seeing that the tabling motion fails, we have a motion to amend the order, which would provide the approval of the order subject to addressing of the screening by September 30th to the staff's satisfaction. Discussion on the amendment.
Just when, I would defer to Councilor Lee.
Speaking to my motion, I think it provides carrots and sticks. It gives him the conditional approval of the license, which allows him to continue to operate, however, provides us some leverage, and that is that upon the date that he needs to have his license renewed, we can revoke it if he hasn't made the repairs.
And just as a point of clarification on this, if we take the route that Councilor Lee is suggesting in granting a provisional permit, if they are out of compliance by the 30th, which is what Councilor Lee is recommending, this would not come back to us, correct? It would simply, they would lapse and they would be out of, the permit would lapse, correct? I would rather this not come back to us once we render a decision today. So I just want clarification on that.
If they become compliant between now and September 30th, this motion would not require them to come back to you.
But if they continue to be out of compliance after that point, would have to come back to us for us to revoke that.
Their license would expire on the 30th. I think the big difference is you're putting that judgment on staff instead of in your hands. And just so, if that's the route we're going, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page about what standard to expect. It won't be a brand new fence. It may not be of a solid color, unless you want me to make sure it's of a solid color.
I think that this is really important that we get this right. If we're going to grant a conditional license by staff's satisfaction, we should be very clear with staff as to what that means. Is it a new fence? I don't think that's too much to ask. Or is it a painted fence? I don't think that's too much to ask. This is a high volume corridor into our community. There have been issues with this fence in the past. There have been past violations relating to this operation. What happens if they're in violation of some other aspect of the facility in its operation, but they've managed to somehow satisfy our staff with regard to the fence? Do we still grant the license under the motion? Is the only thing on the table the fence? What are we asking staff to ask of them through this motion? What staff needs that direction?
I wanted, I guess I'm going to look to Eric and staff for clarification. The ordinance itself does not require the screening to be uniform in color of a certain condition. It just requires there to be screening. To get at what Councilor Frost is suggesting, would that require more specifications within the ordinance as to what the screening should be? Just want to make sure that we're consistent in our application.
I think it's easy under the state law standards that and the ordinance, which mirrors those essentially, to say that the fence is not properly maintained. I mean, if you're hammering on one board, the one next to it is breaking because it's rotten enough to do that. So it's not being properly maintained. I think they could repair it, but it would require a lot more new materials than what they've been willing to put up so far. So a substantial repair or a replacement is probably the best way to have a solid fence that won't just continue to break in weather events.
It seems to me that the applicee here, the permit applicee, is didn't really take seriously our tabling of this at the last meeting. If the best they did was try to replace a few boards, and then they found that it continued to break as they were doing that on the day before tonight or whenever it was, and they haven't taken more substantial efforts. So I'm disheartened by that. And I'd hope that this council could send a stronger message than conditionally approving it without any specifics about what's required.
My hesitation with providing specificity to this is that we would be requiring of one applicant something that we may not be requiring of several other applicants that we did via consent agenda at the last meeting. So that is the reason I would choose to defer to staff here to make that judgment, because they know what standard they've applied to other applicants.
Any other councilors wish to debate? This is just on the amendment to the order again. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that we need to, with the amendment, we need to make sure that we're just asking that they follow the state guidelines and your guidelines, which is well-constructed and properly maintained. We can't write an ordinance or write into an ordinance to be that specific on it, because like Councilor Lee said, we haven't put that standard to anybody else. So we got to make sure that if we just ask that point, item 2 is covered, or as you talked about, item 1, 2, and 4 is done to your satisfaction as a code enforcement person, then we should accept the license. And that has to be, at least this go-round. Now, maybe in the future, we got to set specific standards by making changes in the language, or this is state language, I understand, right?
State language that
So
we're relying
we need to
on.
at least make sure we're following what we think is state language, because obviously it is right on a state road and everybody sees it, and we just can't let it go.
And if there's not a consensus as to what you want me to require of them, then maybe it's best we table it till October 2nd, and I'll bring you back exactly.
I don't hear that yet.
No, I think
Okay.
I think it needs to stay as a well-constructed and properly maintained at a minimum height of 6 feet, and you have to decide that he's met that requirement.
And if there are different colors and different materials that are
That's
somewhat
subjective, there's
inconsistent.
nothing in there that says it has to be, you know, I'm saying maybe it's up in the future, but I don't think we can be that specific in this case.
Well, I would be interested to know what he has to say.
Councilor Frost, you're out of order. Councilor Lee?
I want to also confirm that given the carrot that we're extending here, I'm very serious about extending the stick, that an 80K action for enforcement would be the very next step coming after this if he is no longer in compliance with what's required of the statute and of the ordinance.
Councilor Frost, one last comment before the vote on the amendment.
You know, multiple colors painted over a succession of decades, in my mind, is not well maintained. As this council seems to be content to leave it, that'll be up to you, but I wanted to share that opinion.
I will ask for a vote on the amendment by a show of hands. Everyone's clear on the amendment? Those in favor? Those opposed? 6 to 1. The amendment becomes the full motion.
So just to be clear, this would be provisional permit through the 30th, pending determination by staff.
It would be granting of the license conditional on meeting staff's satisfactory addressing of the screening issue by September 30th. Those in favor of the order, show of hands. Those opposed, carry 6-1 with Councilor Pross in opposition. Thank you, Eric. New business. You may. If you could please take a seat behind the mic and introduce yourself.
My name is Don St. Germain. I'm the owner of Morris Auto Parts and Don's No Preference Towing. You guys had your last meeting, and it said there was 75% of the stuff that was done. In the meantime, we've repaired the fence. There's 2 boards that he took a picture of today that's at the very top of the fence, which you can't see the yard with. You're looking at the sky if you look at it. That he took a picture of. That's all he said. And nobody ever contacted us since the last meeting to say that we had to do this, do that, or whatever. So if you guys had a gripe, you should come over and let us know. Nobody come to see me. We did repair the fence. It's not 100%, and never will be. The fence is getting old, like everything else. It's the main road that comes into town, which I know, and I've been told by some people here in the city that they would like to see the junkyard off Washington Street because it's the main road. The solution to that is there's federal money available that the city can get from the federal government to buy the place out and close it. If that's what you want to do, good, let's do it. But I don't like the game plan that I'm getting from the man behind me, because he came in today at 2 o'clock, I guess, and he took a couple of pictures. That was the end of it. But the place, I don't know how, if you know how many years it's been there, it's been since April of 1938. 79 years the place has been there. We've contributed hundreds of cars to the city of Auburn for demonstration for the fire department every time they get new equipment to train the officers on how to use it and whatever, at no cost to the city.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
We met a week ago tonight to discuss this, and it was tabled at probably 8:30 at night on Monday.
Yep.
What communication did you have with the city of Auburn from 8:30 last Monday until tonight's meeting?
Nothing. Nothing till he walked into my shop this afternoon at probably 2 o'clock.
So I don't want to go any further than that, but I'm going to look to the manager to make sure that we get some understanding of if there was or was not follow-up, because that...
Ask him. He'll tell you. First time I saw him today is, and the only reason I saw it the other night is I happened to be going through TV, and I saw you had the city council thing going on, and it was in session about it, so I listened to it, and that's how I got the thing as to what's going on. So, you know, you want to do your part, good, do it, but let's communicate. We did our job. He said at the time to us, and I believe he told you people, that we had 75% done of what he wanted done. And since then, we've repaired the fence. You can ask him. He'll tell you, I believe. There's only 2 boards that I saw. There's a top that were broken. And the reason for that is we got to get some more pieces to put behind it because the reinforcement behind the fence was rotted. And trying to run 2 businesses, I only got so many hours in a day and so many employees. So, but we did the best we could. If it's not acceptable to the city, then I don't know what to tell you. But I think if you go up and down Washington Street, you're going to find other places that's worse shape than what we are. And some of them have licenses and some don't. And our fence is in compliance with the federal government, which says you've got to have a fence at least 5 feet tall. Our fence is 7 feet above. The other thing is when they rebuilt the bridge, they raised the height of the bridge. That was one of the gripes they had. Now we can see over the fence into the yard. We should extend our fence, we were told. It meets federal guidelines, so we shouldn't have to adjust it. If you guys raise the road up, then that would be your responsibility. The other guys that raised the road, I didn't. But we've done what we can do, and I think we've done a pretty good job. Like I say, the place has been there 79 years. Maybe it'll be there longer, maybe it won't. But one way, if you don't like it on Washington Street, you know what junkyard on Washington Street, have you people look into it, go to federal government, there is money available. I know of 2 yards, one was done in Massachusetts and another one. The federal government come in, had the place appraised, has the value of land building, what the business is worth. Put the money up, paid it, gave 6 months or so to clean it, get their land. The city took it over, whatever they wanted to do with it. I think it'd be a good place for the city to have a substation for the public works. Because right now, you're way over on that side of town, come wintertime especially, you got sand roads and all that stuff. Time they go out there, get a load of sand, get down there, spread it out. They're probably doing 2 trips a day, maybe 3. If you had equipment and stuff in that section of town, you could service that section of town a heck of a lot better than what you do now. Roads and everything else. So, if you got any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. If not, I think I said my piece.
Thank you for coming up. Appreciate it. Under new business, I will entertain a motion on Order 89.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we pass order number 89-09182017, designating Robert Stone as the official voting delegate and Denise Clavette as the alternate voting delegate for the Auburn to the Maine Municipal Association Annual Business Meeting scheduled for October 4th, 2017.
Second.
Motion by Councilor Titus, second by Councilor Cross. I will look for any spirited debate on this item.
Just a quick inquiry. I understand from reading the agenda that there are no actual policy-based substantive voting actions to be taken at this meeting.
That's correct.
Until he moves to suspend the agenda.
And I certainly would assume that if there were any such items, that we'd have an open discussion as to what the city's intention was.
Fair assumption.
Yes.
I'll ask for a vote by a show of hands. Those in support of the order? Those opposed? No opposition. 7-0. Item 4, Order 90. Entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move we adopt Order 90-09182017, appointing Jody Dorisco to the Lewiston Auburn Transit Committee.
Second.
Motion by Councilor Burns, second by Councilor Stone. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor, show of hands. Opposed? Carries 7-0. Reports. Let's see. Councilor Stone may highlight this. There was a follow-up meeting with respect to the passenger rail study at NEPRA last week, where the scope of work with VHB was reviewed, VHB being the preferred consultant that came out of our consultant interviews. We went over the scope of services as well as the timeline for the study with plans for both initial public forums as well as a public forum probably 2/3 of the way through the process to come back in and check in on the analysis. Once we get the final scope of work and timeline, we'll push that over. I'm expecting in the next 2 to 3 weeks. There's a plan for the advisory group that was voted in, 3 from each side of the river, to start meeting monthly after this month's meeting. So we'll start meeting probably the 3rd or 4th week of each month through the duration of the study, which they're projecting will take about 12 months. Sort of done in phases. First phase being sort of the market analysis, understanding ridership potential, origin and destinations of potential riders, and certainly if there's interest from the council, I'd have no problem asking Sue Moreau or Patricia Quinn or a representative of NEPRA to come up and kind of walk through the scope of work, not necessarily as the public meeting for the study, but so that the council can be aware of what's happening around that. I think that's really all I have for now. I'll defer to the city councilors who may have reports. Councilor Young.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll report that my city councilor, Adam Lee, was in the Bob Bushy race. It's well documented by MaineRunningPhotos.com with both video and photos. Have not seen the media from St. Dom's Academy yet, but I understand that's coming. That's all I have to report. Fabulous job.
The mayor covered the passenger rail meeting very well. I would add that there is now a movement underway amongst the members to have future meetings in Lewiston, Auburn. So it'll save us time and money if they come up here.
No report, just a couple of comments. One, just wanted to comment on the workshop that we had last week. There are a lot of good things on there, and I hope that we're going to be able to carry them forward. But two items that were on that I'd really like to just bring up and hope that they're prioritized. One of them is cooperation with the Sewer and Water District. It was on that list, and I was glad to see it. But I think we finally should get together somehow and get everybody all in one room and see if we can hack out something that goes on there. I'm about to go to the sewer and water meetings again this week, and I'd like to be able to bring up some ideas at some of these meetings that, you know, can go back both ways. The other thing I noticed too that was very good, but I have not heard anything on yet, was any kind of ordinances relating to the retail and/or wholesale marijuana and medical marijuana growing in the city. I brought it up again a couple of months ago, but I'm just going to keep bringing it up every couple of months to say, listen, we need action here, because in February, if we're not going to do a moratorium, which this council has decided we don't want to do that, and I'm in favor of not doing that, but if we aren't going to do that, we got to be ready for what's going to come. And if we're not ready, it's going to be just mayhem like we have now, I think, with our growing operations as it is right now. Thank you.
I don't know if this will drive traffic to Councilor Young's website, but you can enjoy the last tenth of a mile where two St. Dom's cross-country runners overtake me and sprint very quickly past me. No report.
September 26th, United New Auburn Association will meet at Rowley's Diner at 6 o'clock. Kim Taylor from Sherwood Heights School Principal will be our speaker that evening, so please come on down and listen to the young lady. September 28th, the Neighborhood Watch Group will meet at 6th Street Congregational Church, 6:30, put on by the Auburn Police Department. Please come and bring your thoughts about the New Auburn area and problems that may happen or not happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a short note for folks at home. The election season is almost upon us. Maine has a very easy and permissive voting laws when it comes to voting early and voting by mail. I would defer to the clerk as to when ballots are available for the general election, but I believe it's now we're coming up.
October, right after the Columbus Day holiday, which 10th, I believe.
We're still a ways off then. But mark your calendars, folks, because it's always good to vote. Vote early, vote often.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 3 items I'd like to give a brief update on. I know that the council has been concerned about tax-acquired city property. I had a meeting with the committee that the city has regarding that last week. Jody DeRisco, the new executive assistant, and I both attended. I've tasked Jody with this assignment of working with me and the folks that are on that committee to move that process forward. I thought we had a productive meeting. We're going to be meeting on a monthly basis to address that issue on the tax-acquired city property and other related properties.
Okay, so there are two standing committees now. There's a tax-acquired property committee, and there's a city-owned property committee that was created as part of the disposition. So either they're two different committees or they have a different name, but I want to make sure it's clear what we initiated last year was not just the sale of tax-acquired property. So I want to make, words are important, so I want to make sure we're not confusing that this just goes beyond tax-acquired.
It does. This is the staff committee.
We were all in there, all the stakeholders, the tax-acquired people and the other people were in the same room. at
Right.
the last meeting.
We're looking at all those.
We're looking at all the properties, not just the tax acquired.
Just one for the public and make sure we're all on the same page.
Good question. In terms of the work plan, as Councilor Titus spoke about, we had a workshop on the work plan last week. I will be coming back to you with a report on that. I thought that that was a very productive discussion. I appreciated the participation from the mayor and all the members of the council and the department directors. Lastly, on the marijuana issue, that is an issue that I've been talking with Jody DeRisco about. We're getting our information together that John Bouvier had been working on with staff as well as Eric Cousins, and we are moving ahead, and we'll be doing a workshop with the council in the future on that issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council. You have the August financial report. We're 2 months into the fiscal year already. Well, actually, we're almost done with the third, but this report is at the end of August. And as you can see, we had already started collecting some of our property taxes. The taxes receivable went down $5 million in the month of August. As soon as the bills go out, a lot of people start paying. So that helps the cash flow for the city, since we have all of our debt service due September 1st. On the revenue side, we are at 12.62% for, which is a little below, but once the property taxes hit, it'll be way over. I'm not concerned. I did highlight a few. Excise tax continues to outbench my benchmark, and I increased the estimate quite a bit this year, and it's still over where I expected it to be. Property taxes are a little bit higher than they were last year, but percentage-wise, they're about the same. Revenue sharing is up a little bit, and the homestead exemption is higher than last year, but that's because of the increase in the amount of the homestead. So we get reimbursed from the state for a portion of that. I think it's at 50%, and so that's 50% of 20,000 instead of 50% of 15,000. So expenditures really are right along where they were last year. None of the accounts, none of the operating departments were much different than they were at the same time last year. LA 911 was lower, but they had not requested their first subsidy payment. So we got that in September, and it'll be the same. You have the EMS billing. As you can see on the first page, we're continuing to write off a certain amount each month. We didn't get a whole lot written off in August. I didn't get the list until at the end of August, so that'll show up in September. We wrote off another $45,000. So, and then you have Norway and Ingersoll, and they're pretty much in line with where they are at this time of year. If anyone has specific questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor. Director Eastman, I would very much like to see you introduce the same format of the financial reporting for the airport.
I know. I knew that's what you wanted when we had that meeting, and that's what I plan to do.
I knew you knew that was coming, but it won't have as many line items on it, obviously. Right. But if we could just have the same format, it would be great. Thank you.
I will work with Rick on that. I think I can make it easy for them to do, so.
I would entertain a motion to accept the financial report and place it on file.
So moved.
Second.
Motion from Councilor Burns, second from Councilor Walker. Those in favor? Those opposed, 7-0. Final open session of the evening. close it. He's just here to observe.
Good.
Would you like to make a speech, Councilor Walker?
Yeah, I would, just a little one. The city manager, I'm sure it got by him because he had quite a few other things, but the ribbon cutting was this past Saturday, and it was a great day that all of us should have been there. But most of all, it was to open up the Senior Citizen Center, which is from 50 years of age and up to whatever your lifespan may be. We were hoping that we were going to get a major crowd. That didn't happen. I don't know if that's our fault. I don't know if it's the way we reported it out. And being Saturday, we thought we would really draw a lot of people. The Hasty Community Center itself has had many, many new pieces, reconstructed, and what a beautiful looking place. If you take the time, go down there, walk through it, and see what has been done in the last year and a half in that building. And then to go into the Ingersoll and see exactly what has happened to that facility and where it has come to today. And then you go into the old Parks Department garages, is what we call them, which is really not that old of a building. But it's a great senior center, giving everyone in the two cities an opportunity to come there and use it. All they need to do is make dates and times that will work with the Recreation Department and the City of Auburn. It's an opportunity that we want people to use and take advantage of. It's a beautiful facility. It will grow if we can get the seniors to come and use it with us. And I'm very proud that the City of Auburn invested the money they have in the last few years in Pettingill Park. And it has not come to an end yet. There's more things to be done and better things for the future, I hope. Thank you very much.
The last item on the agenda is an executive session with respect to an economic development matter. There will be no action after. We'll simply return to adjourn. I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we go into executive session to discuss an economic development matter pursuant to Title I MRS Section 4056C.
Second.
Motion from Councilor Pross, second from Councilor Walker. Those in favor, show of hands. Those opposed, carries 7-0. Thank you. motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion, yeah, second.
Those in favor? 5-0-2.
Very good,
Councilor Stone
very
staying
good,
later.
very good.